Hey guys, Jeremy here with KISS Aquatic Systems. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I am preparing my koi pond for potential future power outages. So, hurricane season is rapidly approaching, and we've had two 5-day long weather related power outages the past 3 summers here. So now's probably a good time to start getting ready. So as far as big koi ponds are concerned, just given the sheer scale and volume of water and fish, the best way by far to get through a power outage is to have some sort of a backup generator. So you can just keep your whole system running smoothly and not even have to worry about it at all. But clearly I don't have one of those. So as you can see here, I decided to go with the next best thing, which is an air pump that can run on some big rechargeable batteries. So I decided to go with an air pump rather than any other form of equipment because the biggest killer of koi in warm weather outages by far is suffocation. So the plan here is to power the pump, which will supply the necessary oxygen to the fish and to the water using the big batteries, which I should be able to run for at least 2 days without having to need to recharge anything. And that should be able to provide enough oxygen for these fish to survive even with the rest of the system shut down. As you may have noticed, I decided to go with the Koi Air 1 17-watt pump that moves 0.8 cubic feet of air per minute. Now, the manufacturer of this product claims that this product is good for ponds up to 8,000 gallons. But in general, when manufacturers make big, grandiose claims like that, I like to haircut them by at least 50% or more. So honestly, I think for this reasonably stocked 5,000 gallon koi pond, I would probably need 2 of these pumps to aerate on an ongoing basis if I didn't have any other power here. But this one by itself should be sufficient for its intended purpose here, which is to keep my fish alive in an emergency. So in general, when you're short on power, an air pump gives you much more bang for your buck than a water pump in terms of enabling gas exchange and ensuring your fish don't run out of oxygen, which again is your number one concern for a warm weather power outage. And that's quite simply because air is a lot lighter than water. So a pump that moves air is going to need a lot less power than a standard submersible or external pond pump that has to move much heavier water. So from just a pure aeration perspective, I feel like this 17-watt air pump does about as good a job as any of my 200-watt, 3,600 gallon per hour submersible pumps. Which, needless to say, given that they have more than 10 times the wattage, would be a lot harder to run on batteries. Also, sort of goes without saying, but if gas exchange is your number one concern, then actually pumping gas into your pond is probably the most straightforward and efficient way to accomplish that. So I actually just purchased all of this equipment this past week, and I thought in this video I'd unbox the air pump and give it a nice little test run with the new batteries, just to make sure it all works before the return windows expire. So that's what we're doing now. This air pump, as you can probably see, is pretty easy to set up, which is normal. For this particular pump, I do know that some folks like to get additional hose clamps to make the connections on the diffuser plate end a bit more secure. But for me, everything fit together pretty snugly as is, so I didn't really need to do that. Also, I'm liking the nice heavy duty weighted airline included here. And it looks like they also included a one-way valve or check valve that screws into the diffuser plate to make sure that water doesn't backflow up the airline into the pump and damage it when the power isn't on, which is a nice little check, if you will. But obviously, it's still recommended to place the air pump above grade, which I think is always prudent. Okay, so let's try plugging this pump into each battery and make sure it all works. Okay, so everything's looking good here. The bubbles are bubbling, the batteries are doing their job, at least for the 5 minutes that I'm testing them out, and so far so good. I will add though that the weather does happen to be pretty nice and sunny today, but both the air pump and the batteries do need to be protected from rain. So I think I may buy a cheap tent or something that I can set up just in case I need to run these in bad weather. Also, as you can see, I placed the diffuser in very shallow water on a plant shelf about 1 foot down in this pond. Now, if I were to place it any deeper in the pond, there would be less air coming through the diffuser. And that's simply because as water depth increases, the pressure also increases, working against the air. And a fixed amount of power on your pump, you will get less airflow with more pressure. So if your goal here is to maximize the airflow and surface agitation from your pump, then putting it in shallow water is best. However, if your goal with this air pump is rather to just move the whole water column and keep things from stratifying, and you're really not that worried about dissolved oxygen levels, then you're probably going to want to put it in deeper water, in more of a central location in your pond. But again, for me, this pump is really only going to be used in an emergency power outage situation to make sure my fish have oxygen. So this placement here for this test run is appropriate. Okay, so overall, I'm reasonably pleased with this setup. It should keep my fish from suffocating in an extended outage. Now, my advice with koi, particularly during an extended warm weather outage, is to be really, really laser focused on keeping your dissolved oxygen up, and that's it. So, everyone knows that koi guzzle food, but what some folks perhaps don't realize is how much they also guzzle oxygen, and how quickly they can deplete your pond of it. Just using some rough numbers, let's say I were to lose power in my pond here during a hot August. Water temperature is, call it 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius. So my pond water, if it's fully saturated with dissolved oxygen to begin with, starts off with about 7.5 milligrams of oxygen per liter, which comes out to 140 grams of total dissolved oxygen in this pond. Really not all that much in the grand scheme of things. So as I deplete only half of that oxygen, which is roughly 70 grams, the concentration of oxygen in my water goes from 7.5 mg's per liter to 3 or 4 mg's per liter. At which point the koi will really not be happy, and I'm likely to start seeing them gasping for air at the surface and having all kinds of problems. So how fast you get down to those dangerous levels and even lower levels depends on a bunch of stuff. Most importantly, your stocking density, of course, and how clean your pond is. But it can typically happen in anywhere from a few hours to a few days. So regardless, clearly there are some very slim margins here. Again, especially under the warmer weather conditions when water holds less oxygen to begin with. So during the outage I had last summer, my koi started gasping for air about 1 day into the outage. Fortunately, I do happen to have a neighbor with a generator who was kind enough to let us hook up an extension cord at that point, but otherwise I would have been in some very serious trouble. Okay, so in addition to ensuring you have enough dissolved oxygen, there are some other things you can and should do during an extended power outage to improve your odds of success, which mostly boils down to just basic common sense and good fish keeping practices. So it helps to keep your pond as clean as possible, both before and even during an outage. Removing any excess solid and dissolved organic matter will lower your system's overall bacterial oxygen demand, which can be pretty significant. And it also decreases the production of toxins that can build up from the breakdown of that organic matter in low oxygen environments. So things like ammonia, nitrites, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other lovely things. Also, your filtration system is likely to be pretty much dead in an outage. So it's also good practice to do a thorough filter cleaning during an extended outage to avoid dumping those same toxins into your water when the power returns. Another best practice that I like to do is to set your garden hose up on the side of the pond and do a constant low trickle water change. Of course, if you're using tap water, be sure to remember to add your dechlorinator of choice every few hours while doing this. So what this does is it further helps to flush out any dissolved organics and toxins that might be building up in your pond water. And as an added bonus, during hot weather, it can help cool down the water a bit and add some aeration. Aside from that, you're definitely going to want to avoid feeding your fish, even if they're looking for it, which they probably won't be. And obviously, throughout the process, you're going to want to avoid doing anything to stress out your fish more than they already are, because trust me, they will be very stressed. Now, I know some folks recommend adding hydrogen peroxide to your pond water to increase dissolved oxygen. I'm not really a big fan of that actually, as it can be dangerous to your koi and particularly their gills. So for me, this should really just be a last ditch resort, only if your koi are already on the brink of death to begin with. Okay, so now let's say you've survived the outage. You're probably going to have to worry about a couple things afterwards. So you're going to probably need to recycle your pond, and you may have some lingering fish health issues to take care of for the following weeks. So to some extent, you're back to square one and have to get back to doing all that fun stuff you probably did when you were starting up your pond in the first place, like aggressively monitoring and correcting ammonia and nitrite spikes as you rebuild your filter's nitrifying bacteria population. Also, when fish are stressed, their immune system is weakened. So you're definitely going to want to keep a close eye out for any parasites or pathogens, at least over the following few weeks once power is restored. But really, I'd suggest again that during the outage itself, focus almost entirely on dissolved oxygen and then you can worry about all that other stuff later. A power outage is an emergency, and getting your fish through it should be your number one concern. After all, you can't have a koi pond without koi. So thanks folks, that's all for now. Just wanted to show you guys how I am getting my pond ready for possible power outages this year. So hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and happy ponding.